So a little bit about Fierce is that Fierce is a small woman-owned business specializing in reselling enterprise open source software for our public sector customers with a specific focus on federal system integrators. Specific value-add elements that we bring are innovation brokering, license management, professional services, formal training, and custom technology enablement workshops. Our perspective as a reseller means that when we hear your goals and technology challenges, we respond from the perspective of our portfolio and not as a single vendor solution. We love to be an innovable and the best technology we can find. We like to hear the entire challenge and take ownership of finding our customer a complete solution. In addition to being an innovation broker, we offer several other value adds. If you need professional services as part of an install or for ongoing access to professional expertise, we work with vendor professional service teams that can bundle those for you, and this is for both uncleared and cleared resources. We also provide access to formal training. Today, we are going to be talking about Red Hat training specifically. This is something that we've provided for quite some time now, and this webinar is an example of our technology enablement webinars and workshops that we do. If you see anything today that fits, we'd love to follow up with you. If this wasn't a good fit, let us know where we can fill in the gaps and fit for your specific needs. Now let's take a quick look at what you can expect from the webinar today. So we're going to go over a technical overview of Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform, the benefits of using Red Hat Ansible and Ansible Tower to manage complex automation workflows, a highlight of new features introduced in the Ansible Platform 2.0 that was recently released this year, an outline of Ansible Curriculum offered by Red Hat Training, and then join us on how to learn the extended use of Ansible automation with your entire environment. So today, our speaker is going to be Wes Urquhart, and I will give you a little bit of background on him. Wes is an associate solutions architect at Red Hat, and he covers all things Red Hat training and certification has to offer. Wes is actively pursuing multiple Red Hat certifications, but enjoys conversation around integration and application development. If you see anything that would be a good fit for you today, or you would like to get geared up on more training, here is how you access the Red Hat training on the Fierce's web store. After the webinar, you'll receive an email from myself. Please feel free to contact me for any additional questions you have or training needs. You can also email the training alias over at Fierce, give our mainline a call, or go on our website. And then after the event, we will be sending you guys a follow-up email just to get your information on where to send the super cool Ansible stock. And yeah, just be able to provide any information you have. So now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and Wes, I will kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Olivia, for that great introduction. Let me just get my screen share started. Okay, can everyone see me, hear me, and see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Awesome. All right, then we'll get started. Hey, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Ansible Automation Platform 2.2. As Olivia mentioned, my name is Wes Urquhart. I'm a solution architect in the North America Training Group. I'm also joined by Rob Locke, who's a solution architect in the training group as well, my colleague. So if you have questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A, and he'll probably be the one over there answering them throughout the presentation. If we don't get to them, we'll certainly do our best to get to them at the end of the webinar. We should have a couple of minutes left to sort of do Q&A and questions. So feel free to lob them in there all the way throughout. Want to welcome all our SIs that are here represented. Did our best to get as many of you up on this screen as it kind of runs with the faint C animation as it goes. But know you all are super interested in certain aspects to kind of help better the customers you're working with. So we'll definitely touch on some of that, as well as certification for your folks. So just a brief agenda here today. We'll give some background on where Ansible Automation Platform fits into Red Hat and the overall strategy in our portfolio. Then we'll talk about why the Ansible Automation Platform for automation needs.
Hey, Wes.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in, but your screen share, there it goes. I think that's better.
Might just be running a little behind. Okay, cool. So good to know my screen share is running just a little bit behind schedule. Awesome, no worries. We'll accommodate for that. I'll just switch the slide a touch early. Cool. So with that being said, we'll talk about why the Ansible Automation Platform for your automation needs. What makes a platform, right? So we're going to use that word a lot. What does that mean? Why is Ansible one? And then what's new in AAP 2.2? Believe it or not, we're at the .2 release of the platform, which means a lot of customers are going to be kind of taking it up at this point. So really excited to talk about the new features that are there, as well as, what's new in Ansible Automation Platform 2 throughout the presentation. And then training and certification at Red Hat with a focus on certification. And then Q&A at the end. But of course, please feel free to throw the Q&A in the chat throughout, and we'll do our best to sort of answer those. Rob will definitely be helping out there. Looks like just sort of as I'm looking at the chat and I'm sort of hearing what Rob said, sounds like my screen share is just a touch behind my voice. It's probably a bit of a blue jeans wonkyism, no big deal. So be patient with me if I'm talking a little bit and it seems like my screen hasn't caught up. Give it a second, hopefully it'll refresh. So at this point, we're going to dive into the background portion of the presentation. We talk about the 3 pillars of our business. A lot of folks, when they think Red Hat, I believe the first words that come to their mind are open source and Linux. And that's great. Those are 2 great phrases that we love to resonate with folks in terms of our brand and our image and sort of what's at our core. Because open source and Linux really are at the core of our business, the core of our hearts. But as the world moves, as the IT landscape around us sort of shifts into the cloud, into this wild west that is the cloud, we sort of have adapted our strategy. We've looked inward and said, okay, we've got our portfolio here. How can we best meet our customers where they are and really service them best? And we sort of settled on this open hybrid cloud strategy. That strategy consists of 3 pillars, which are shown here. The red is hybrid cloud infrastructure, so the ability to have a secure, scale, and manageable foundation across wherever you are, whether that's bare metal, virtual machines, all the way out to the edge and everything in between. Want to make sure you have that consistent, reliable, and scalable experience, and that's mostly RHEL. We're talking about you're running a foundation your infrastructure on, so you can kind of trust your infrastructure no matter where you are. Then in the green, we're looking at cloud-native development tools. So just because you're in the cloud doesn't mean you're doing cloud-native building. So we want to have tools to help those developers develop, deploy, and manage any application in the cloud, any environment, and give them those tools they need to take advantage of being where they are. And then in the blue at the bottom here is where we're going to be spending most of our time today in the management and automation section and management and automation pillar of our strategy. You've got this vast IT ecosystem with hybrid cloud infrastructure and cloud native development, all of these tools, all of these places you can run it. Well, what good is it if you can't get your arms around it, right? So having tools to manage it, as well as to automate where applicable, to sort of keep folks from just clicking the same button over and over again, keeping yourself away from security vulnerabilities in that way, keeping yourself consistent and compliant, are really critical. So that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time today. So as we kind of move ahead, let's talk about how those pillars overlay into our portfolio. And hopefully when the slide sort of generates, you're looking at our Red Hat portfolio slide. This may look like a lot of different pieces and parts, but it all does fit together with the strategy we were just talking about. So the red rectangle there toward the bottom, the bigger outline here, is kind of what we're talking about, that hybrid cloud infrastructure piece, right? So that's RHEL, wherever you need it, and OpenShift, wherever you need it for your container platform needs, whether you're running it on RHEL, bare metal under your desk, all the way out in your car on the edge, or on a millimeter wave node for 5G, right? We want it to be a consistent, scalable experience that you can sort of understand and keep your processes the same no matter where you are. On top of that, in green, you've got our cloud-native developer tools. So Red Hat Integration Suite, our Runtime Suite, our Process Automation Suite, all of that lovely stuff. Things like 3-scale API management and Fuse and AMQ and AMQ streams. All of those lovely tools sort of sitting on top of a container native environment. And then on the left, you've got a few different management and automation tools in blue, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today. So at the bottom, you've got Insights and Satellite, which are great. They're there to help you understand when you need to patch, when you need to update, how you're best taking advantage or not taking advantage of your tools, whether that be RHEL or Ansible. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Above that, you've got Advanced Cluster Security and Advanced Cluster Management for Kubernetes or OpenShift, which are 2 great tools to sort of keep your containers neat and tidy as you build out this multi-cluster environment. And then at the top, Ansible Automation Platform. I love where this is positioned in this graphic, mainly because it being at the top left sort of draws your eye to the idea that it can apply across the entirety of this portfolio, and it can. It cannot just apply across this entire portfolio, but beyond it, right? We like to say with Ansible, you can automate just about anything, and that's just about true. And we're going to talk about why that is and kind of what's under the hood of the Ansible Automation Platform throughout this presentation today. But before we dive into the Ansible Automation Platform itself, let's take a step back and sort of present a challenge. Stop me if you've heard this one before, right? You've got a bunch of different teams that have sort of developed over time at an organization, their own processes, their own tools, and their own ways of doing things. And they've kind of become these siloed areas. And in a lot of ways, that's okay in some respects, given that we want to applaud folks for innovating within their own domain to make their lives easier and the lives of those around them easier and the organization better, right? Like if a dev has automation scripts written in Bash, that's great. It got something done at the time. It works for them, but it's not necessarily something that the security ops team is using, right? The SecOps team might have a different configuration management tool that they call their automation tool, maybe Puppet or Chef. That's helping them manage security profiles within enterprise platforms to make sure that folks have the right levels of access in whatever tools that they're using. And that's great. That's another automation tool. But then your IT ops team and your network ops team might be using two completely different automation tools. And then you've got four. And again, I want to reiterate that, these efforts should be applauded because we want folks to take that advantage of sort of automating and sort of gaining efficiency in their own space. That's a great thing. But at some point, you got to step back and say, okay, we've got four different automation tools just in this screen alone. They're not playing by the same rules, same guidelines, or using the same tools. So how can we sort of take those groups, take the innovations that they've done, put them together, put some guardrails around it, and encourage transparency between the teams so they can be using the same language, understand who's dependent of who up and downstream to better understand the organization as a whole, and also sort of put that information out into the open, right? Instead of people having tribal knowledge and being information refrigerators, so to speak, just kind of holding it all in, we want them to radiate it, right? We want them to be information radiators where they're saying, hey, I've got this cool thing I learned how to do in the tool that you're using too. Come take a look at it and see how you can apply it across in your part of the organization. So that's what we're looking at, and that's where we want to go, right? So connected teams with coordinated automation, and those two things really work together. Connect those teams together to foster that DevOps culture where folks are actually talking with one another and actually kind of make strides in those ways, and it helps you scale better as you have that same tool and that collaboration with the connected teams. You can sort of understand how to better scale, eliminate those redundancies, and kind of keep yourselves compliant. And with that, you can coordinate your automation, right? You don't necessarily have to have two teams doing the same thing, or maybe you can time up the automation, the way it runs from team to team to make it more efficient, cut down on time it takes to do things just because of when you schedule jobs to run. And also you can reduce the complexity of your IT environment just by eliminating automation tools, right? You can basically say, instead of having four, let's just have one and let's all work together. And then you only have one platform to maintain, one platform to teach, and one platform to repair if something happens, right? And at that point, you're also eliminating some vulnerabilities because there's less things to attack in your ecosystem. So three things: unite the teams, automate tasks easier, and create that collaborative DevOps environment. That's where we want to go. I think you knew where I was going with this. The Ansible Automation Platform can help you with those three things. You can improve efficiency, increase productivity, and control risk and expenses with the Ansible Automation Platform. It can help you. Now, I'm saying the Ansible Automation Platform, and before I dive into my next session, I do want to ask, do organizations you work with as SIs already use some sort of automation tool? That should be a poll question that I think Olivia is going to put out there for me. So whenever I get the results sort of popping up in my window, I'll go take a look at it. Please feel free to answer it. Whatever your answer is great, and we'll kind of come back to it. Just a yes, no, not sure question here. And we'll kind of come back around to see what those results are. I know the timing is a little wonky on some of this stuff, so if it ever pops up or when it pops up, please feel free to answer it, and we'll give it a look when the results come through. But we were talking before about the Ansible Automation Platform being an automation tool that can help you with those challenges. But the natural question is, why the Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform for your needs if there's more than one tool out there that's automation tooling, right? It's a great question. So a few simple things, right? The three key pillars to me of the Ansible Automation Platform are: it's powerful, right? It can do all of the things we're talking about. When we talked about in the portfolio slide that can automate those pieces in our portfolio and beyond, we do mean that, right? So you can do complex processes at enterprise scale, get those automated. But it's also simple, right? What good is this masterful set of tooling if no one can figure out how to use it? Well, the great part about the Ansible Automation Platform is it's simple. And your playbook writing, which we'll get into the weeds of what a playbook is, what it looks like in a little bit, your playbooks can be your documentation. And it can be pretty easy to read for someone with very minimal background in any kind of technology, frankly. So that's a really powerful combination by themselves, but then make it agentless, right? You can automate hosts just with using credentials to log into other machines. You don't have to have it running everywhere. You don't have to have an agent of Ansible running everywhere you want to automate. So you can easily integrate with hybrid environments. Powerful, simple, agentless. What that leads to is the ability to meet anyone's definition of automation. The word automate can mean something very different to very different groups, and that's okay, right? Maybe to that security ops team, you want to manage configurations in your enterprise systems. You can do that with the Ansible Automation Platform. Or maybe to the infrastructure team, you want to provision or deprovision virtual machines. Yep, no problem. Maybe you want to secure and comply your containers, right? Maybe ensure security and compliance across your container architecture. No problem, right? All of this stuff are things you can do with the Ansible Automation Platform. We can meet your definition of automation, which I think is really, really cool. Also, you're not going to have to do it all from scratch. Right away, right out of the box, Ansible Automation Platform comes with 100+ certified connections kind of right out of the box. We work with partners to make sure that these are maintained, make sure that through releases of their platforms, their products, or ours, that these still work for common automation use cases, whether you're automating a network box like Cisco or Arista router, whether you're automating RHEL in your infrastructure or OpenShift, things in AWS or Azure, right? Or some various security tools. We're kind of there for you with those pre-built connections so you can recognize value from the Ansible Automation Platform right away, right out of the gate, which is really, really cool. And that will lead me to my next section in a second. But the second poll question for today is, what does automation mean to you? I've got a couple of definitions in there, and I would love to sort of hear kind of what I'm working with in terms of the audience, in terms of what the working definition of automation is. If an option that doesn't really fit you is not really on there, feel free to throw your answer in the chat. That's perfectly fine as well. We'd love to hear it. And I'm still looking for the poll question, so I don't see either of them there yet, but I know we're kind of dealing with a couple of issues here. So hopefully they pop up in just a minute. If not, no big deal. But whenever they do, please feel free to answer those, and we'll kind of come back to those answers. So what were we just talking about was the 100+ certified connections that we're adding all the time with our partners. And that really leads me very nicely into what makes a platform. I have said Ansible Automation Platform more times than are worth counting in this presentation. And I'll probably stop and shift to just Ansible or AAP here in a minute, because Ansible Automation Platform over and over again can be a mouthful. But why can we use that word platform? What makes it one? Great question. So kind of working from the bottom up, that certified content that we talked about before, right? Those certified connections, the ability to sort of log into a cloud-based GUI, go look and see, oh, hey, I can go sort of just check out this pre-built connection for Azure. Awesome. Automation right out of the box that is certified by Red Hat. But not just that. There's also content available in the community, right? Folks can post their content that they create, their automation, into what's called the Ansible Galaxy, which is a community of just saying, hey, this is the automation I've created, check it out. You can go peruse automation that others have created, check it out for your organization, maybe gather some inspiration. Of course, those aren't necessarily certified, so you definitely want to test those appropriately, make sure they're working the way they should in your ecosystem, but they're great places to start. And again, just great places to gather inspiration, if nothing else. That leads into the cloud services portion of this slide. An automation engine is great, and a powerful automation engine at that, but you need to have some things sitting on top of it in order to make it more useful for more folks. So the ability to actually log into a GUI, which is Ansible Automation Controller, talk about that in a little bit. Some of you may be familiar with Tower. Controller is the new Tower. Logging in, seeing how people are using the tool set, seeing some analytics, also understanding some workflows you can create, credentials, and as well as kicking off automation directly from templates or just scheduling jobs within that GUI is a really great tool to add on top of just the Ansible automation, which is the engine that kind of makes it all go. None of the stuff on top would be good without the stuff underneath actually working. And the stuff underneath working really well wouldn't be good if no one could figure out how to make it work. So it all kind of works together to really sing and make the Ansible Automation Platform a platform. So as we kind of move ahead, we're now kind of into the real meat of the presentation, which is talking about the automation lifecycle. Create, operate, and consume. It is easy to look at these three separate pieces and think of them as three separate personas. And in some ways they can be, but what I will tell you is, depending on what you're doing and what you're looking to automate, you could be all three personas in a single sitting. Let's tease that out. So let's say I'm a developer and I need a new virtual machine that's a new test environment to test out and we'll build and test out a new feature in our web application. Let's just say I'm updating the shopping cart. Let's say I'm making some tweaks, making some changes to make it easier to use. Maybe I'm creating a one-click tap-to-pay kind of interface, whatever I'm doing. Well, at that point, I'm not sitting in the team that can actually provision those machines. So I'm having a network issue. It says, can everyone hear me okay? I had a network issue, so it says I'm going to keep going unless otherwise told.
All good, Wes.
Awesome, good deal. I always want to check just to make sure. Anyway, so moving ahead, I'm that developer working on that shopping cart. I want to go request a virtual machine. I'm going to go into the Ansible Automation Platform, and I'm going to, or even ServiceNow for that matter, depending on my level of closeness to the platform. And I'm going to go and fill out a template to request a virtual machine. That's going to get kicked off for some approvals. Someone will approve it, and then I get my machine and I, provision a test environment for myself. Awesome, good to go. Well, then at that point, I build, I develop my stuff, and then I need to test it. Well, maybe I don't want to write these test scripts and fire them off. So maybe I go back through and write some playbooks to test what I'm doing, fire those playbooks off, and then see what the results are. In that scenario, that very common scenario, I've been an operator when I went in and actually provisioned or asked to provision my virtual machine, and a consumer because it was for me. And then I was a creator because I wrote test cases, an operator because I fired them off, and a consumer because I wanted the results, all in the same sitting. So it's easy to think of these as simply personas, but they are a bit more than that, a bit more complicated than that. So as we kind of keep on moving, let's break it down. Let's talk about create. So this is a playbook. This is the heartbeat of automation in the Ansible Automation Platform. This is what's really under the hood. It's written in YAML, which yet another markup language for some folks, or just YAML for others. And it's meant to be easy to read. I mentioned before that your automation can kind of become your documentation. And if properly kept and if standards are properly adhered to, there's some new tools to help with that. The .2 release, we'll talk about that in a little bit. You can really do that. And so let's look at this. So if I'm somebody coming in and I've never seen a playbook before in my life, my eyes are kind of drawn to a few different things. First of all, the structure of this. I can kind of see that these things called tasks are kind of subsets of this thing up here. So it seems like this is a header, and it seems like all of this kind of happens afterwards. And then from there, my eyes are drawn to the red text by the name. Maybe I'll just start there. Install and start Apache. Seems like my goal here is to install and start Apache. Makes a lot of sense. HTTPD package is present. Latest index.html file is present. HTTPD is started. Well, that seems to make sense, right? I'm just making sure the package is there, the file is there, and then it's started. I can follow that, even if I'm not someone who's that close to the platform or that close to even this necessarily function within my organization. I can read that and I can get what's going on. Now, as you kind of understand a bit more about this playbook as we break it down, you can obviously go deeper and deeper and understand exactly what's happening, which we will. But from a starting point, as someone who's just approaching this without really much knowledge on Ansible or on playbooks, we're in a good place. So let's move ahead and let's break it down. So what makes up an Ansible playbook? A playbook is comprised of one or more plays, which is a unit of automation. A play is a set of tasks sequentially run to do an automation task, or an automation object, I should say. Modules are the things that actually do the work, the functions, and plugins enrich it and kind of make it a more enriched and more robust sort of automation experience. We'll talk about all of these as we go. Well, let's start with plays. What am I automating? Right? At this point, what you're going to see is breakouts of that playbook that we just looked at. So right now, if I say install and start Apache in this screenshot, I'm going to go backwards. We're at the top, right? We're up here. So it's kind of level setting in our heads where we are in the playbook. So we're at the top of the playbook. Question is, what am I automating? So a play is just a unit of automation, so to speak. It's the top level specification for a group of tasks, right? And it will tell you what the name of the automation is, the hosts, or where you're automating. So in this case, the name of my playbook is, or my name of my play is install and start Apache. And the host is web, meaning I'm automating all of my webs, whatever's in that group. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then become yes, we'll talk about in a little bit. That's actually a plugin. We'll get to that in a couple of slides. But it'll tell what host to execute it on will kind of be that name for that automation. So again, a play is building blocks for a playbook. So you can make a playbook out of one or more plays. The one we're looking at right now is a single play and a whole playbook. It is not uncommon kind of at the beginning of your automation journey for playbooks to be just one play. But very quickly, you'll find that you're making more and more plays in your playbooks, and then you can even get more and more complicated, which we'll talk about in just a second. So next are modules, which are the tools in the toolkit. They're the things that do the work. In this case, we're looking at this section of the playbook. So latest index.html file is present. Let's go back just to sort of level set where we are. So where we're at is right down here in this second section, which is a task. So we're a little ways down. We're actually doing the work. We're doing some of the automation, and we're actually keying in on this template portion. So let's go back to the slide. So they're the tools in the toolkit. They're actually doing the work. If you're familiar with kind of Linux, it's very much a command, right? It's very much kind of entering what's happening, and then you can have the parameters below that module as the inputs for that command. So in this case, template is just like a copy command. So template is copy, and then down here you see the parameters are source and destination. So what am I copying and where am I putting it? In this case, I'm copying files index/index.html, and I'm putting it in var www.html. That makes sense. The modules are usually written in Python or PowerShell for Windows users, but can be of any language. You can write your own. There are plenty that are already existing for you to use right out of the gate. But if you want to write your own, you absolutely can. Plugins are the extra bits. So they're the things that sort of enrich the experience. They can be a lot of different things. And in this case, what we're looking at, again, we're at the top of the playbook again, the install and start Apache section, where it says become yes. This is kind of like a sudo or becoming root. So elevating your privileges in this case. So you want to run this playbook as a privileged user. That's the kind of thing you can look at with plugins. So some other pieces are roles. So they're able to sort of reusable automation actions. If you're doing a lot of things over and over and over again, you can sort of group them together, write a role, and then sort of just insert that in as a variable. So group your tasks and variables of your automation in a reusable structure, right? So it's basically just making your life that much easier. Collections, one more sort of organization for you. So basically, it's taking everything and putting it together in a way that makes sense for you. Maybe you organize it by the host that you're automating on. Maybe this is all the automation we typically do with AWS, or this is all the automation we typically do with RHEL, all of that good stuff. It can be organized in any way, comprised of modules, playbooks, roles, plugins, docs, tests, you name it. You can put it into a collection. This is an example of what a collection looks like. So just a folder structure, kind of like what you'd expect, just composed of units of automation that we just talked about. Automation Hub is a trusted source for everything in your automation sort of ecosystem, so to speak. So you can control it. It's got your private content, right? And we can talk about private Automation Hub on the next slide, which is your own instance of Automation Hub. But in this case, you kind of have your private content that you've made, the content that you've published, the content that you've looked up in Galaxy, in community, and Red Hat certified content kind of all coming together. And again, Galaxy is that community where you can go look for automation content. This is the private Automation Hub, basically kind of taking it and distilling it one level for your organization. So you've got the Automation Hub, right, which is kind of the world, so to speak, where you can go look up anything in Galaxy. You can publish anything into Galaxy. You can, build your own content, and then you've got the certified content. Take it one level down, and you can sort of curate the pieces and parts that work best for your organization, right? You can take the collections, you can take the certified content you want to use, your own content, as well as some stuff that you vetted from Galaxy. And you can put it into your own private automation hub for your organization to use, feed that into your AAP cluster, and then out to the domains to automate. How do you get collections? It's a great question. 3 different ways, right? A requirements file, everything can be a file. You can pull it via controller, again, automation controller being the new version of Tower, the new GUI, and then through the command line. So the other question, we've got a lot of moving parts here, right? So but you've got your collections, which we've talked about, which are all of these various folder structures and organizations of all of this automation that we've talked about, playbooks, roles, plugins, all that lovely stuff, modules you've built perhaps. And then you've got various dependencies in the outside world, that may depend on some of that stuff that you've written. And then you've got the actual runtime itself, right? The engine that has to take those instructions that you've written and actually execute on them. How do we keep all of that together? Well, in AAP2, the answer is execution environments, right? We created a container called execution environments or containers with a universal base image of your collections, your libraries, and Ansible core. And that's sort of how we're building and keeping everything and all the dependencies all aligned. For folks that are more familiar with Tower and more familiar with the older version of Ansible Automation Platform 1.2 or before, this is kind of like replacing the Python VMs that we're running in Tower. What we've done is we've actually taken these out of controller. So we split the control plane and the execution plane. There's a graphic for this coming later to basically say, hey, this is where the actual control is happening, hence controller, and then the automation, the execution is happening below, hence execution environments. So this is just kind of a workflow that you see of someone creating something, using the execution environment builder to build up your execution environments. That is worth noting that in AAP2, you've got the execution environment builder to sort of help you build up that container architecture. We're not leaving you high and dry to do it on your own. Builder's there to help you out, to kind of pull in all of those pieces we talked about, feed it into your private automation hub. Navigator, same idea. Can work with playbooks and execution environments, scalable and supported. All right, that was a lot just in the create function. Just a reminder, we're in the automation lifecycle. We just finished create. That was the longest section. Now let's talk about operate. So now we've created automation. I want to go in and I actually want to operate the controller. So what does that mean? So first and foremost, let's talk about a playbook run. And at its core, what does an automation run look like? Well, a playbook is interpreted and run against one or multiple hosts, task by task. So the task by task part there is important. The order of operations matters. Okay, it defines the execution. So the task 1 runs before task 2, runs before task 3, onward. And in a task, again, the module's doing the work. And when you kind of get the feedback, it's probably hard for you to see. It's probably a little small here. But each task sort of comes back to you with a message that says, hey, this is what happened. And you'll come back in one of 3 colors. Green, which is good, but it means nothing was changed. So we ran this, nothing really happened. Yellow, which means we ran this and something happened. So it kind of takes an adjustment, at least in my head it did, to recognize that yellow might actually be a good thing. Because when you're automating something, typically you want something to change. And then red, of course, means a failure. Go check the logs and see what actually happened. So at this point, right, we've talked about the components of automation. That's what a playbook run looks like. And that is playbooks and execution environments are actually sort of in the create sphere. If we go one layer out, right, one band out in the anatomy of automation operation, we see the operation circle, so to speak, right? So all of this in automation controller. So you've got your workflows, your APIs and webhooks, centralized logging and audit trail, and credentials. And we're going to break down each of those in the coming slides. So first and foremost, within controller's execution of content, running that content's at the core of things. So you can actually log in, run it, check who ran it when as an audit trail, and kind of creates the central place where content execution runs through. It's a full audit trail, including what version of content was executed, what variables were provided, who did it, when, etc. It's also there to sync Git repositories and take care of your execution environments, and then credentials, inventory, and logging. We'll talk about credentials. We can talk about it now, actually. So the really cool thing, I think, about how the automation platform works with credentials is we talked earlier about a playbook example where we created elevated privileges, right? We use that become function to become root, become yes. And you're not necessarily exposing the person running the playbook to those credentials. they can only use those elevated privileges in the context of the playbook as you've allowed them within the automation platform, right? So you're not exposing those credentials. Controller's holding this for you. So the other piece of this is inventories and credentials. So we talked about credentials within the automation itself, but we're going to talk about the other credentials in a little bit. We'll hold on to it. But let's talk about inventories, right? They can be static or dynamic, and they're just a grouping of things, right? They're a grouping of hosts. So you can say, this is all my routers, this is all my switches, or this is all my my rel servers, et cetera, et cetera. You can group them however you want. And they can be static or dynamic, meaning you can sort of write rules around how to make them flexible, which I will say is a common question we get is in today's container world, where containers are ephemeral and their IP addresses are changing. How do we handle that? Dynamic inventories is how. Workflows, right? Basically the ability to kick off automation sequentially one after another that makes sense, as well as some simple approvals, simple yes, no kind of stuff right there in controller, which I think is cool. APIs, if you're a developer, you love this, the ability to sort of get into controller and get into automation without actually having to log in, right? Just being able to access and kick off jobs via API. So you can absolutely do that. We also integrate with your, it's not on this slide, so it's another one, your IT service management systems, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so APIs are there for you to sort of execute automation without actually logging into the platform. Dashboards, right? Today, information is really key, really critical, understanding what's happening. So on the left there, you've got the overview of the actual cluster. So what's happening, the actual nuts and bolts of the jobs are happening, what's connected, what's working, what's down, what's not. And then on the right, you've got the overview across clusters to sort of get a more bird's eye view of, hey, who's using automation in my organization? How are they using it? What templates are they using most often? What modules are they using most often? What plays are they using most often? And then who's not using it, right? Kind of understanding who's taking advantage of this tool and who's not can sort of better help you understand adoption at your organization. Go to places that are using it more and saying, hey, how are you using this and why do you find it helpful? And go to places that aren't and ask the opposite question, right? So it's really helpful to have these sources for information. Today, everything it really boils back to, can you prove that with information and data? Here's the data to help you do that. Okay, back to the automation lifecycle again. We've created, we've operated, now we're consuming. This is probably my favorite slide in the whole bunch, just because it sort of puts everything out there really nicely. In Ansible Automation Platform 2.0 in the architecture. So you've got your users there on the left, which are where we are in kind of the consume section. So they're going in, and they can access Ansible Automation Platform by web UI or by API. So if you're just a developer wanting to access via API, you can do that, or you can log into controller. And all of the lovely stuff we've talked about at this point with self-service, approval, and role-based access controls, we're going to talk about more of it in just a second, is there in that control plane, which we talked about, right? So the ability to have all of this lovely stuff in controller. Any actions there feed down into the execution plane, which is where those execution environments are, right? That universal base image, that container that we talked about, that will feed down into those, and then that automation will kick out into the domains for folks to get advantage and take advantage of that automation, right? So with that split of the control plane and the execution plane, let's talk about how that affects the consumer. So the great thing is self-service is one of the best parts, in my opinion, of the Ansible Automation Platform, the abilities to use self-service and enable folks that may not even realizing what they're doing when they go to ask for automation. So on the left, you can have teams access directly via controller. They can just log in, they can just kick off a job, folks that are very familiar with doing that. But for folks that may want to be further away from the platform, may not want to give direct access to, and maybe just they don't know anything about Ansible, but they know they need a new project created or they need something done in a system, and they don't actually want to do it, but they know they need to request it. Well, you can kind of integrate it with your IT service management system. In this case, that's a ServiceNow clip you've got. And you can enable all of the areas sort of around your organization to use automation without really realizing they are. Role-based access control was a tough one for me. It's really key. So the ability to kind of control users and sort of what they can and can't do within controller, within Automation Hub, within Private Automation Hub is really important, right? So folks can't just log in and have overarching access within, right? You can strip out what they get and what they don't get, what they can see, what they can't see, You can have approvals as well, sort of embedded in there to make sure folks aren't kicking off automation they shouldn't, even if they have access to it. And it's all backed by enterprise authentication if needed. Again, approvals, talked about that a second ago. You can have approvers assigned to approve automation. So even if folks have access to it, they may not be doing it right, or they may not have needed to do it then. So having approvers in the way is always a good idea. And then again, I mentioned this a couple of times, the integration with your IT service management system, in this case, ServiceNow, a great idea for self-service. So we've gotten through the life cycle. We've talked about creating, operating, consuming, how a person can be all three of those things in one go and what they each mean. But now let's talk about what's new in AAP 2.2. We've talked a lot about AAP 2 in this presentation, right? We've talked a lot about how controller is the new tower, and we split the control plane and the execution plane, how those execution environments are now a container architecture with that universal base image that are replacing those Python VMs. But that's kind of old news, right? Automation Platform 2 has been out for a little while. The .2 release is fairly recent. So what's new in the .2 release? Well, that's a great question. Quite a bit is new, but what I will mostly say as a summary is our product owners listened to feedback. And a lot of it is going in and kind of taking that feedback on the new platform and implementing some features that were commonly requested, which is really cool. It's always great to hear when your concerns are listened to and kind of taken into account in the development cycle. It's really great stuff. So that's what a lot of what you're going to see here is requested features, as well as just kind of fixes that are rolled out with the .2 release to sort of make it a bit more mature, so to speak, as every release will. So in the new AAP 2.2 release, new feature, topology viewer, which we'll talk in greater detail about in a second. New chain of custody features for Ansible content, always good to know who has it and when. Updated developer tooling, there's actually a lot in that updated developer tooling section. We're going to break that down in the next slide. Network automation enhancements, always good. Automation services catalog is now a self-hosted on-premises offering, always good. And then two other sort of pieces to help with integration to other Red Hat products. Streamlined integration of Red Hat Insights. We talked about that earlier. I mentioned Insights sort of can work with Ansible as well as other tools. So Insights is there for you. And then support on RHEL 9, right? So we released RHEL 9. It's actually been quite a few months now. If I think about it, it's been quite a few months, but making sure we're supporting on RHEL 9, making sure all our products are sort of working on RHEL 9. So the .2 release is the release that's supported on RHEL 9. So let's talk about a couple of these features in a little more detail. First is new developer tooling. So I mentioned earlier when we talked about the playbook and sort of how we can read it, and it can be your documentation. If you follow proper formatting procedures and proper practices and standards of your organization, well, a new tool, Ansible Lint. Right? Linting is always good, sort of verifying that the structure of your playbook is sort of the way it should look, especially with YAML, with spacing being so finicky. You definitely want to make sure that you have kind of that proper protocol, so to speak. So linting is always good. This isn't tech preview, so give feedback. It's technically not a final feature at this point, so definitely give feedback on the feature, but it'll help you sort of develop that consistent code, promote best practices and patterns, and sort of help you with integration into larger CI tools. I know linting is a major process for folks that have OpenShift pipelines, and so that's definitely really great as well. Navigator 2.0, right? A brand new sort of release to Navigator. Pass-through control of Builder, along with pass-through control of Ansible Lint, so the ability to use Lint with Navigator, very critical, as well as simple settings management of modified activities available, Ansible Navigator configurations within VS Code extension in the next slide. And then native execution of ad hoc Ansible commands in an execution environment. So that's great too. I mentioned the VS Code extension a second ago. Who doesn't like a better visual editor, especially when you're doing something like writing playbooks in YAML? This is a better visual editor, right? So it's an updated VS Code extension for syntax highlighting, live validation, integration with Ansible Lint, right? So now you've got this VS Code extension with Ansible Lint, kind of a powerful tandem to keep yourself in check, and then auto completion and documentation, which is music to everyone's ears. And then topology viewer, an easier way to sort of see what's running and where for visual people. It's just a nice sort of visual cue of what's happening with automation mesh. It kind of simplifies everything and sort of helps you see what's going on. So training and certification at Red Hat. I want to talk about that. I do want to kind of come back to our poll questions here. So just to kind of round out our results for folks that haven't seen it, do organizations you work with already use some sort of automation tool? 2/3, so 67% said yes, a third said no. If folks aren't using one, definitely give Ansible Automation Platform a look. And then what does automation mean to you? We had a 50-50 split on provisioning servers, VMs, and containers versus managing complex configuration and provisioning network devices. So those two sort of got put together. So good stuff. That poll is actually still active if you want to swing the voting there. But otherwise, let's talk about training and certification at Red Hat. So moving right ahead, this slide is helpful to me just because it puts a number to something I think we all know in the back of our heads. 59% faster deployment of new IT resources for those that are trained up on Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform with Red Hat Training. We've done some research with the IDC, and so that's always good to see. I think we all know that training helps, but it just helps to put a number to it to know how much. So you have a variety of ways to train. To me, it boils down into two separate real groups. You've got instructor-led, so actually someone taking you through the courses, versus self-paced, doing it yourself on your own time, and a variety of different sort of modalities within those two. So whether you want to be in the classroom or virtual with a customer or with an instructor, and sort of have them sort of coach you through, we can do that. We've done a lot of virtual deliveries, especially through the pandemic, and honestly, before we've done a lot of virtual deliveries. But if you've got sort of teams that are spread out, as you know, through the pandemic, folks were hired from various geographies, and you want an excuse to bring them together, training in person can be a great reason to do that. And we've actually gotten back to being in the classroom for some of our customers. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you've got a customer that's interested, or if you yourself are interested. And then, of course, online, video, read, and the Red Hat Learning subscription being there for you as sort of the Netflix offering, so to speak, of all of our courses, save one or two. They're on demand for you in read, in video, as well as all of our labs. Again, for those of you that aren't aware of kind of the way our training works, it's about 50 to 70% hands-on with labs that we host, so guided exercises and labs to sort of take you through and actually use the skills that you're learning through the lecture, which is really great stuff. And that actually sets you up really well for certification. All of our exams are hands-on, practical, not multiple choice, so you definitely want to make sure you're well prepared going in. One thing I do want to mention is for the individual exams on the right. If you've got a group doing exams on the left, that's great. You've got a couple of options, whether it's being administered in the classroom or on site. Either way, an instructor can sort of give you an exam, or an examiner can give you an exam in person if that's the way you want to go. But for the most part, we see folks take exams individually after they've taken a course and studied some. And you can take that at a testing center if they're open near you. Definitely check. Some are starting to come back. It's definitely been one of the laggards from the pandemic. It's kind of harder to find testing centers these days. So most folks are doing them remotely from the comfort of their own home, which can be great for some and difficult for others. Completely acknowledge that. We're working to get more testing centers open for those cases. For the remote exam, just a few tips. Make sure you read all of the kind of the material to prepare you at least a few days ahead of time. You've got to have some specific equipment. If you want to use a keyboard, for example, it has to be wired. You have to have a webcam with a 1 meter cable wired into your computer. You can't use more than one monitor. There's a lot of different pieces and parts. It's not hard. It's not complicated. You just have to read through it. It's just detailed. The other thing I will mention that I will tell you is helpful, our certification team recently posted that video linked on YouTube, and you can just kind of go to YouTube if you want and just search Red Hat certification preparation. And you'll see our certification team actually walk you through a sample exam environment. That is the first time, to my knowledge, we've ever sort of allowed a sample exam environment to be shown outside of a real exam situation. And that is actually what a lot of folks struggle with the first time they come through and take an exam is, hey, this is a new environment. I've never done this before, kind of working your way around. So seeing that video can be really, really helpful just in terms of level setting, what to expect, what things look like, and a couple of helpful tips and tricks, and sort of save you time when you go into your exam environment so you can dive right in instead of just getting yourself acquainted with the environment. Definitely worth a look. So let's talk about our Ansible curriculum. It starts at the top with that technical overview, right? DO007. We have a variety of free technical overviews available on our webpage for a variety of our products, whether that's Ansible or RHEL or various OpenShift pieces as well. They're anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, and they're available on demand on training.redhat.com, free to anyone right now. There's no hands-on with that. It's just videos, and we've often seen success with executives kind of taking some time and looking through those to understand what their teams what their personnel are doing at their organization with the tool that they just procured or that they're just putting in. From there, we've got 3 separate starting points in our Ansible curriculum. Why do we do that? Well, it's because you can automate just about anything with the Ansible Automation Platform. That means that folks are going to approach the tool with a variety of backgrounds and need to learn it in different ways. So we teach those foundational concepts, playbook authoring, modules, roles, a lot of the stuff we talked about here in this presentation, the basics, we go deeper into them and you get hands-on from a different perspective. So whether it's a network administrator perspective, a Linux administrator, or a Windows administrator, you're learning those same core concepts in those courses. I will say that means folks don't need to take more than one of those, right? Once you've learned that intro material, you're in good shape. And from there, you can jump into one of the exams. If you're looking at the Linux to the network path, right? These EXs are recommended exams after that course. Or you can jump down to the advanced material. And we have 2 advanced courses that everyone sort of filter into. DO 374, Developing Advanced Automation with Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform, teaching you to automate at scale, because we understand that when you're learning how to automate a single Linux box, for example, in RH294, that's different than automating 100. So understanding some principles and some core tenets to really kind of get that underway and get your arms around a larger ecosystem in DO 374. You also learn a bit about what's new in AAP2, a bit about execution environments, which is really helpful. And then recently released, a couple of days ago actually, DO 467, Managing Enterprise Automation with Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform, is all things automation controller. So we spent a lot of time today talking about controller. It is the new tower, once again. So if you are looking for training on automation controller, that is where you will go. We do expect an exam to come out for that as well soon, as there is one currently for the DO 374 course. So stay tuned on the EX 467. We hope for that soon, but as of yet, not quite live. So one more poll question for you that is already live. I'm looking at it. What sort of Ansible Automation Platform training and certifications are you most interested in? Looking at the result, I've got other, which is lovely. I'd love to hear in the chat what that means, sort of between those various pieces, what you're looking for. Would love to hear a little more from you. With that, I'm looking at the clock. I was going to jump into our Red Hat Learning subscription and show you a couple of things, but with the time here, I do want to make sure I leave enough for Q&A. Let me go check just to see if there's any questions. Well, I don't see any at this point, and there's nothing in the chat, so please feel free to post questions, and I'll kind of jump off this demo if questions come in, and I'll prioritize those. But for now, I am going to jump into our learning subscription and sort of show you a bit of that new course at DO 467, and actually show you what controller looks like. So let's dive in. And I'm going to jump over here to a new tab. And this is the learning subscription homepage. So again, it's got all of our various training courses, save a couple in here in self-paced format. And so I'm going to go to our DO 467 course we just talked about, the controller course that just released. I'm going to click read. And if you look at the table of contents, you can get an idea for what sort of concepts you're going to be learning about. In this case, I'm actually going to dive into Chapter 2, Managing User Access. And I'm actually going to jump into a guided exercise, creating and managing automation controller users. So I'm going to click into that. And our guided exercises are meant to be just that, an exercise that takes you through from beginning to end and sort of teaches you a concept through doing. We actually have labs at the end of chapters as well that will sort of test your skills, sort of take those training wheels off. But in this case, we kind of log in here, and it tells you want to log into Workstation as student and sort of start up the lab. So let's jump over to our lab environment. And again, in the learning subscription and in all of our courses, we host lab environments. You don't have to worry about that. In this case, you can see there's a lot of virtual machines associated with this course. I think this actually is the most virtual machines we have with any course. But I'm going to open Workstation, as I was instructed to do. And I'm going to log in. So it just punched me out into a virtual machine. I'm going to log in. And it wanted me to run the startup script, which I've already done. So lab start org user. I'm just in a Linux box. This is just a Linux terminal window. And I started the lab. I got success steps. And then I want to move on to the next piece. I've actually already opened an instance of the learning subscription within the virtual machine. And it says, navigate to controller.lab.example.com, log in with admin user with Red Hat as the password. So I will. Perfect. I'm on controller.lab.example.com. And this is what controller looks like. And I've got an instance to play with. And that's Mostly what I wanted to show you here is that you've got an opportunity to play in a sandbox with something that you can just kind of go in and break if you want to and kind of destroy and recreate. But in this case, I'm actually going to follow the exercise. So then it says navigate to access users and click add and create this new user. So let's do that. So I'm going to scroll over here, access users, click add, and it gives me some information to fill in. So I know it was Sam Simons, and I'm just going to make up the email. And the username, we'll go back and see what it wanted me to say, is just Sam. Password was Red Hat again, and then the user type, normal organization default. I click save. Oop. Does not match what I entered previously. It would help if I could type, wouldn't it? There we go. And now we've got this user, right? And so at this point, it's going to tell me, hey, now go look to go see what it looks like. Go to the roles tab, take a peek, and then it will tell you to go take a look and see at what sort of levels of access. And you'll create different users and explore the access levels that you get within Controller. And this is a super simple exercise. This course gets way more detailed and way more complicated than that if you're interested in learning more about Controller. But this is just an example of sort of what you can expect from a Red Hat training course in terms of some hands-on components and just a chance to get into a lab environment and play around and break stuff if you would like. With that, I will go back to the slide deck here. I'll put it back in slideshow mode. And that will conclude the presentation today. I really am thankful for you all for jumping in and listening and learning about Ansible Automation Platform 2.2. I hope there was something you could take away from today. And with that, I'll kind of do one last check for questions in chat. I don't see anything in the chat nor anything in Q&A. With that, I think I'll pass it back to either Colleen or Olivia to sort of take us home.
Thank you, Wes. That was great. I'll share my screen really briefly again, just to show some follow-up assets you guys can have. So thank you guys again for joining us. Thank you, Wes, for putting it on. That was great. If you would like your Ansible socks, we will be sending a follow-up email to conclude this event, and then we'll collect your address to mail these to. And then, like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to email myself, call the main line, or email our training alias at Fierce. But with that being said, thank you guys so much and have a great day.